There was a moment in the third quarter of Game 2 when the basketball seemed to vanish beneath whistles. The score paused, the pace unraveled, and the narrative shifted from execution to endurance. By the time the horn sounded in Las Vegas, the number that defined the night wasn't a line from Aya Wilson's box score or a shooting percentage. It was 41 fouls, whistled across 40 minutes, 16 of them in a single quarter, that pulled the air out of the game, and with it the Indiana Fever's rhythm. That is not the whole story. It never is at this time of year. But it is the frame within which the rest must be understood. After leaving Game 1 with a statement victory that checked every box — control, composure, a vintage scoring performance from Lexie Mitchell, disciplined defense that dared the MVP into a long night — Indiana returned 2 nights later to a different kind of test. It wasn't just the 2-time champions they had to beat. It was the conditions. The Las Vegas Aces responded as champions do, pushing back physically, targeting the Fever's stars with pressure at every catch, and leaning on a whistle pattern that cut the game into fragments. The totality was a Game 2 that felt less like a chess match and more like a tug-of-war, the rope in this case being momentum. If you are wondering how a series can pivot twice in a week, there's your answer. The Fever forced Game 1 into their image. Game 2 refused to let anyone breathe. And yet, the most telling numbers across these first 2 games belong to Indiana. They left the desert with a double-digit win and a bruising loss, but without a crisis. They arrived back at Gainbridge Fieldhouse tied 1-1, a best-of-3 now reduced to a best-of-2 on a floor where their fans make the officiating feel as loud as any basket. The Aces protected their home court once. The Fever cracked it first. What comes next will be decided as much by adjustments as by emotion. Let's rewind, first to what Indiana did right, then to what Las Vegas changed, and finally to what shifts now that the series crosses state lines. Game 1 was clarity. You could see it in Indiana's first 5 trips, in the spacing that kept the lane open, in Lexie Mitchell's shot selection and patience, in Aaliyah Boston's positioning and footwork across both blocks. The Fever's opening win, 89-73, was not an upset born of streak shooting. It was a plan executed. They managed pace, never letting the Aces turn a cut into a track meet. They controlled the defensive glass enough to limit second chances. And when they needed a bucket, Mitchell delivered them with a calm that belied the stage. Her 34 points, her playoff career high, were not fireworks for their own sake. They arrived in exactly the order the game required: early threes to loosen the Aces' show-and-recover principles, mid-range counters when Vegas ran her off the arc, a handful of drives that asked the referees to call a foul or live with a score. She earned the latter more often than the former. Indiana didn't need whistles. They needed possession integrity. They got it. The other half of that opener belonged to Aya Wilson's shot chart. The MVP finished 6 of 22 from the field. That is not a sentence often written in this era of the Aces. Credit belongs where it is due. Boston played her without fear, trusting verticality at the rim and footwork on the floor, staying lower than Wilson at the catch, and inviting the right kinds of mid-range attempts. Indiana's wings crowded entry angles just enough to make timing a problem. Help arrived late by design, timed to the first dribble rather than the catch, so that Wilson never saw the same picture twice. There were fouls. There always will be when superstars collide. But they were the product of collisions earned, not whistles chased. In that pocket of control, the Fever carved a 16-point win that looked, even in slow motion, like a night they built rather than one they survived. Game 2 was chaos. Not in the stands. The Mandalay Bay crowd has seen too much of this stage to spike early and fade. Not in the players. Both teams came with the urgency you expect from a series that will not wait for nerves to settle. Chaos, in this case, was the game's internal rhythm. Every time Indiana cut Las Vegas's lead to a manageable number, a flurry of whistles followed. 4 in a row, once, turning a single-digit deficit into a 13-point problem. Across 40 minutes, the officials called 41 fouls. 16 in the third quarter alone. You cannot play a motion offense inside numbers like that. You can only endure, and the end of endurance is survival, not separation. Indiana tried. They did it in ways that will travel. Lexie Hull, who suffered a back injury in the opener and was upgraded to active only after pre-game work, hit 5 threes, tying a Fever playoff record, while absorbing contact on every route and landing in a heap more than once. Odyssey Sims provided lifelines when structure failed, turning busted possessions into points, not with heat checks but with reads that have taken a decade to earn. Boston did what anchors do when the tide surges. 10 points, 13 rebounds, numbers she made look polite even as each felt like an argument with gravity. Every time she sealed, she was bumped. Every rebound was a two-handed negotiation. She rarely drew the kind of whistle her counterpart seemed to attract. She did not change her face. She played. Which brings us to the Aces and to Becky Hammon's pivot. The defending champions did not ride officiating alone. For all the talk of the whistle, and there has been plenty, they earned tactical credit. The adjustment was blunt and effective. Squeeze Kelsey Mitchell until her space was a rumor. In Game 1, the guard broke out into daylight whenever she hunted it. In Game 2, she could not find a clean lane without three bodies arriving at the start of the action rather than the end. Las Vegas face guarded her without the ball, sometimes fronting her completely to take away even a catch, sometimes shading her with a second defender at the nail to deny the first dribble. On screens, they hedged high and physical, bumping her off her line, daring officials to blow what had become a train whistle for anything but movement. They forced the ball to find other hands. By the time those other hands found her again, there were usually single-digit seconds left. She finished with 13 points. Indiana must answer this because Indiana can. Very few teams are willing to live at the level of aggression that requires across 4 quarters on the road. At home, the math changes. Las Vegas won those windows in the second game. Wilson's line, 25 points, 9 rebounds, 5 steals, 2 blocks, drove the headlines. Her game, as it does in this arena, pulled everything toward it. For the second straight night, she brought force in waves. The difference this time was that more of those waves crested, in part because of how the game was called, in part because the Aces did a better job pulling Boston into space and then punishing the help. Jackie Young and Kelsey Plum found their timing. Alicia Clark's minutes lived in the gap between chase and location. Nowhere was this clearer than in the way Las Vegas inverted matchups to create lanes where Indiana had walled off the night before. The Aces are experienced and ruthless. They used both. And still, the most impressive clip of the night might have belonged to Lexie Hull. Consider her week, a back injury in Game 1 that made every twist a question, a game-time decision in Game 2 to suit up, a first quarter in which the tone set by the Aces announced, bluntly, that she'd be absorbing contact before the shot rather than after it. She answered the only way shooters can. She kept shooting. 5 makes from beyond the arc. Those are not numbers that change trophy engravings. They are markers of culture, a teammate paying off the work of the team during a night when flow became rumor. Odyssey Sims was the other barometer. She is not always storyline in the pregame notes. On a night when the Fever's young backcourt was shoved off script, she found a thread and pulled it until it became an opening. 18 points, most of them earned inside contact that would have made others flinch. And, crucially, her minutes bought Mitchell rest without surrendering direction. This matters more than fans realize. Indiana's guard rotation is thinner than it looks on paper. Sims gives sides a card she can play against a team that sends pressure to the arc as a default. On officiating, it's tempting to reduce analysis to a grievance. Basketball is a game of contact, not touch. Physicality is part of the sport and part of postseason basketball. The Aces know how to turn that knob and force their opponent to match the temperature. That is not a criticism. It is a weapon. What troubled coaches and fans in Game 2 was not just how tight the game was called. It was the inconsistency and the snowball effect of a third quarter in which an already choppy game was chopped fine. It is hard to watch a team attempt a run when every trip down results in a whistle, especially when those whistles produce free throws on one end and no calls on the other. The Fever are not asking for a feather whistle. They are asking for a fair one. That is a different complaint. In an irony that did not go unnoticed, even Aces coach Becky Hammon raised eyebrows in her post-game session about the game's physical temperature. Coming from a coach whose team had just benefited from the night's stop-start rhythm, the comment read less like spin and more like a warning to officials that she expects a different standard in Indianapolis. That is the chess behind the chess. Coaches talk as much to the next crew as to the last one. The Fever will do the same without sending a bill. And now to the part of the series that should excite anyone who cares about the WNBA more than a single box score. Choose your noise level. Gainbridge Fieldhouse eats noise and throws it back hotter. There are buildings, across sports, that carry a second-half hum that opponents feel in their calves and lungs. Indiana's home court is becoming one of them. The Fever's players know it. Our fans, they show up and they show out, Hull said after Game 2. Using that energy in the crowd is going to be really great for us. Boston's version was quieter but no less charged. She called the return great, not as a platitude but as a goal, a chance to use what the second game did to sharpen how the third begins. Home court isn't superstition. It's math and muscle. In Las Vegas, the Aces went to the line early and often. In Indianapolis, those same plays will be greeted with 17,000 voices. When Boston absorbs contact on a duck-in, the reaction will alter the way a trailing official sees the player's body position. When Mitchell is chest-to-chest with a defender at 25 feet and two arms appear where one is rulebook legal, the argument will be made loudly in the moment rather than meekly in the tape room. Officiating is hard. Human beings respond to sound. One of a home court's unspoken assets is the way it drapes the game in accountability. The Fever do not need gifts. They need a fair night. From a tactics standpoint, two adjustments will decide Game 3. The first belongs to Indiana. How to free Mitchell from a defensive scheme that is happiest when she initiates 3 feet wider and 1 second later than she wants. The answers are familiar at every level of the sport. Deeper counters after the first hedge, a second screen from the opposite side to punish face guarding, more intentional use of her as a decoy to pocket short roll touches for Boston and rhythm threes for Hull. The Fever will also need to turn Las Vegas's aggressiveness into fouls earlier, not by chasing whistles, but by attacking the bigs in advantage situations where the only legal answer is to concede. The second belongs to the Aces. How to keep Wilson comfortable when Indiana brings the crowd's noise and Boston's angles together in the paint. Expect more elbow touches, more inverted screens with guards slipping under coverage, and more corner spacing designed to make help in the lane cost 3 points. Indiana is not naive about what the Aces bring. Las Vegas is the defending champion for a reason. Professional, ruthless, deeper than most, and led by a player whose presence will one day be carved into arenas. But the Fever have already done what many believed was out of reach. They walked into a banner night for Wilson and the Aces and won by 16. They took the second game's chaos and dragged it into a one-possession window in the second quarter before the whistle storm blew a run sideways. They did it with one superstar in year 3, Boston, one star guard who has carried a franchise alone, Mitchell, one rookie forecast to pull the sport into a new orbit, Caitlin Clark, and one wing who makes every 5-point swing possible when the plan is disrupted, Hull. That is not a fragile profile. It is a blueprint.